Welcome students. This year in the chapter Heredity and Evolution, because of the coronavirus, you have only heredity. So there's no need to study evolution for the coming 2021 board exams. So we are going to start with heredity. As the name suggests, heredity means the characters which are transferred from one generation to other. That means any offspring has got a resemblance to his or her parents or grandparents or the siblings. So these similarities among the same members is called as heredity. Sometimes we say that the child looks like the father, or the child looks like the mother, or like the grandparents, like the aunt or the uncle, anything. So these similarities are because of some characters which pass on from generation to generation. So in this chapter, we are going to study about heredity. What are the rules of heredity? How the traits are passed from one generation to another? Before we understand all these things, first we need to understand two things. One is inherited character or inherited traits. Traits means characters. And the other is acquired character or acquired traits. As the name suggests, inherited means when a character is passed on from generation to generation. Resemblance of certain characters, certain traits. It can be the color of your hair, it can be the color of your eyes, it can be the shape of the nose, it can be your height, it can be your skin color, anything that passes from one generation to another, that is inherited character. And this inherited character is actually present in the genes. At the time of reproduction, the character passes or the traits pass from gene to gene. Whereas in acquired character, it is not in the genes, it is from the surrounding. I'll give you one small example here. Suppose a person who is living in Bhopal, as we stay in Bhopal, we talk about Bhopal, and suddenly the person goes and settles down in a colder region, say somewhere in the European country, say Australia, New Zealand, anywhere, lives there for 1 year or 2 years, you will find that there is a slight change in the skin color of the person. You will find a slight change in the food habits, his way of talking, the accent they use. So, all that differs in the person living there is because what he has acquired from the surrounding. A person or any organism living in an environment tries to adapt to that surrounding. And if the same person, instead of going to, say, New Zealand or Australia, goes and stays somewhere near the equator in the African countries, he becomes little darker. His food habits changes according to that area or that continent. So the characters acquired because of the surrounding is called as acquired character. And this is not passed on from generation to generation. Only inherited characters pass on from generation to generation. Now, all this that has been put up in the books is because of a very renowned person called Mendel. He had framed the laws long ago, what we study as Mendel's laws of inheritance. He was a maths student. He studied science also. He went to a monastery. But then later on, when he was working with a chemist, he came to know about so many plants. He was very observant and he chose a plant called the pea plant, the normal pea plant. And why did he choose this plant for his experiments? Because this plant showed maturity in very short time. Within a span of 2 to 3 months it grows. And there were 7 contrasting characters. He could check on characters based on these 7 traits. That means when he wanted to study heredity, he found that this plant had 7 characters. He crossed them and he performed many experiments, and finally he came to the laws, what we framed as Mendel's laws of inheritance. Mendel's laws state there are the law of dominance, then law of segregation, and law of independent assortment. What does these law state? As the name says, dominance. Mendel, when he experimented with the pea plant, he saw that whatever traits, whatever characters he takes, in each and every character that he took 2 types or 2 contrasting characters. For example, he took a tall plant and a dwarf plant. He found that tall was dominant and dwarf was recessive. He took round and wrinkled seeds. That means when we buy pea plants, sometimes you will see that the shape of the pod, the pea changes. Some are round, some are wrinkled, some are yellowish, some are whitish, some are greenish. So when he took round and wrinkled, he found that all were round. All this he framed as law of dominance. Then when all this he took, it happened only in the first generation, what we call as the F1 generation. But when the same characters were used, or the offsprings of the 7 F1 characters were used in all the 7 contrasting characters, he found that in F2 generation there was some segregation, there was separation, there was independent assortment. That means some showed the dominant characters and some offsprings showed the recessive character. And that is how he framed ratio for F1 and F2 generation. F1 is first filial generation and F2 is second filial generation. So in F1 generation, he always found about the dominant characters. Whether he took a monohybrid cross or a dihybrid cross, the ratio changed, but the laws did not change. So now we are going to see what happens in the monohybrid cross or what happens in the dihybrid cross. In monohybrid cross, as the name suggests, monohybrid. Monohybrid, mono means one. That means he took only one character. For example, as I said, he took a tall plant and a dwarf plant. He gave the gametes as capital T, and for the dwarf he used tall t. My dear children, always remember when we take contrasting characters, we use capital for the dominant trait and small for the recessive trait. That means the trait which is not expressed in the F1 generation. When he took this, what did he get? He took gametes in this way. That means gametes were formed and the square or this block that I am drawing here is known as the Punnett square. And if we learn this way, it is the easiest way. So in the Punnett square, when we crossed capital T, small t, we got it everywhere as capital T and small t. One capital, one small in all the four showed that they were tall plants. All the plants were tall. Here he showed us 2 points. One is the phenotype and the other is the genotype. What is the difference between phenotype and genotype? When I say phenotype, P stands for physical appearance. When the plants were observed from outside, all the plants looked tall. So the phenotype in the F1 generation were all tall. That means all were dominant, which shows Mendel's law of dominance. But when we looked at the genotype, as the word genotype represents genes, that means the characters present inside. When the genes were studied, it was seen that they contained both tall and both the dwarf. They contained both tall and dwarf. So genotype was tall and dwarf, or we use the term recombinant. That means it's a combination of tall and dwarf. This whole thing is the monohybrid cross. Same way, when we do our dihybrid cross, we are going to take up 2 characters instead of 1. If this is clear, I hope you will enjoy studying. If you have any doubt, you can put up in the comment section. Wait for my next video where I will be explaining dihybrid cross and then sex determination in humans. If you like it, do comment, share and subscribe.